right, if there were a political version of Smokey the Bear, don't start forest fires. If there were a political version, I tell you who would be top on his wanted list. It would be Joe Biden. He just seems to be creating these political fires all around him. I mean, everywhere he goes, there's this fire burning, and in fact, it's out of control. So it looks like he's trying to focus on one of them that I think their polling, I read an article in The Atlantic today that suggests that their polling shows that the American people support him in his mandates on the vaccine. In fact, President Biden stated as much last week. Here's what he said.
The data shows that the overwhelming majority of Americans agree with my proposal. There's no surprise, given that 76% of American adults have already gotten at least one shot. But we're facing a lot of pushback, especially from some of the Republican governors.
Well, the polling I've read suggests that the American people are backing the governors and their pushback to the overreach of the federal government. Joining me now to talk more about this, Nebraska Governor Pete Ricketts. Governor, welcome back to the program.
My pleasure. Thanks very much for having me on.
Well, let's talk about that pushback, because you're not alone. In fact, over a majority of the governors of this country they've sent a letter to the president on a number of fronts, not to mention immigration, but on this issue of pushing back on the vaccine mandate.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I want to start by saying, hey, we encourage people to get vaccines. Vaccines help create the antibodies that will help you fight off the virus and avoid going to the hospital or even death. So we are all working as Republican governors to give people the comfort level they need to be able to get that vaccine. But to have the federal government mandate this is just a huge overreach of federal power. That should make all of us very concerned. I mean, first of all, for the American worker, nobody should ever have to make that choice between keeping their job and feeding their family or getting a shot in the arm and violating their own personal health. I mean, I know a lot of people who are choosing not to get the vaccine just because they don't know what to believe. And you can certainly see when you've got the CDC and Dr. Fauci changing their minds, moving the goalposts, you can understand why they would not necessarily believe everything they're seeing coming out of the CDC or Dr. Fauci. So there's just a lot of people who want to see what happens with this for many legitimate reasons. And I think if you're a business, this is something that would be really troubling to you as well, that forget about this administration, any administration, if this is allowed to stand, would be able to declare an emergency, publish OSHA rules, and make private businesses become the enforcer of federal policy. Again, a huge overreach of federal government and absolutely not within their constitutional purview. So this is really troubling on a lot of different levels for our workers, for our companies. And that's why we as Republican governors, even though we encourage vaccines, are pushing back very hard on this huge expansion of federal power. I mean, this is big government socialism, pure and simple.
I'm with you. I am not anti-vaccine. In fact, those in high-risk categories, I encourage them to have that conversation with their physician, their doctor. And if it works for them, they should get the vaccine. But you've made a point, which I think needs to be underscored, that this is about trust, and that the actions taken by this administration is doing anything but building trust. If they wanted to, I think, increase the vaccinated portion of America, they would put all the facts on the table and they would have a conversation with the American people that would include all aspects of the science, including natural immunity, considering individual health situations. But that's not happening.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And in fact, the CDC and Dr. Fauci have been anything but straightforward with the American people. They keep changing the goalposts. Dr. Fauci admitted that himself when he talked about the percentage of people needing for herd immunity. They haven't talked about what about natural immunity if I've already received it. And, one of the things, too, we got to remember is that while I'm very grateful to have this vaccine, it was developed in record time. The previous record for a vaccine being developed was the mumps in the 1960s, and that was 4 years. Typically, it takes 10 to 15 years to develop a vaccine. And so there's time for the information about the vaccine to disseminate. There's time to do longer term studies on it. So people who are hesitant about this are asking those questions because in some cases there just hasn't been the time to be able to disseminate the information. And this is just creating huge unintended consequences where you've got people who don't trust the federal government already. They're putting out this mandate. I've had people tell me they're not against the vaccine, but they're not going to get it now because they don't want to be told what to do. And in fact, here in Nebraska, the week after the president's vaccine mandate announcement, we saw the number of vaccines we were able to deliver go down because of that. And so this is, again, totally counterproductive. I think Dr. Scott Cotley was on TV a couple of weekends ago talking about how companies were going to do this are now going to take a wait and see attitude, further slowing down this. Again, I just don't think the Biden administration is thinking through these policy decisions and running them through all their agencies to look at all the consequences before they jump into something that, again, to me is just going to be totally counterproductive.
As you mentioned, back to the trust issue, when you compare this back to the polio vaccine, it was a different time in which there was a greater level of trust with our government. We don't have that today. And as you clearly pointed out to Chris Wallace on the Fox News Sunday, is that, we haven't had the time. This has been developed in record time. People need to have the ability to know how this is going to play out. Very valid issue. Very quickly, Governor Ricketts, before we run out of time, what is planned in terms of the pushback against the Biden administration, this overreach on private business?
Now, we're going to muster all the tools we have to push back on this. I've been in close contact with my fellow governors, as well as our Attorney General, Doug Peterson, who has been working with his colleagues. They've already sent a letter to the president telling him that what he's doing is unlawful and outlining for him why. And so as we get the regulations that come down to us from OSHA and the Department of Labor, we will be able to form a specific strategy about how to push back on this. But there's going to be several lines of attacks because this is just so overreaching and really so out of the scope of what, for example, OSHA was meant to do. And this is something that, again, we're going to be taking to court and getting this stopped.
Well, we're grateful for you and the other governors fighting it, and we look forward to see how that strategy unfolds as the rules are actually implemented and listed by the federal government. Governor Ricketts, thanks so much for being with us today.
My pleasure. Thanks very much for having me on, Tony.